I was standing on my own front lawn, the lawn where I'd raised two sons, buried one husband, and spent 30 years building a life watching my son change the locks on my door. Just 3 hours ago, Michael had screamed that he'd won $85 million. 3 hours ago, he'd hugged me, crying tears of joy. And then, in the time it took me to pack 2 suitcases, those tears turned to ice. "We're rich now, Mom," he said, not even looking at me. "We don't need you anymore. There's a nursing home that takes Medicaid. You'll be fine." My daughter-in-law, Amber, handed me a brochure, Sunny Meadows Senior Living, and smiled. "We've already started renovations on your bedroom. Well, our bedroom now." As I stood there homeless at 65, I saw my granddaughter's face in the window, tears streaming down her cheeks. And that's when something inside me shifted from heartbreak to something much colder. Because what Michael didn't know, what he was about to discover in the most devastating way possible, was that his lottery ticket was fake. And his biggest mistake, he'd just declared war on the wrong woman. This is the story of how I took everything back. And then some. My name is Eleanor Patterson. I'm 65 years old, and until recently, I thought I understood what it meant to be a mother. I'd spent the last 8 years as a widow living alone in the 4-bedroom house my late husband John and I had finally paid off after 3 decades of mortgage payments. But alone hadn't lasted long. 3 years ago, my son Michael moved back in with his wife and children, and I convinced myself that filling these rooms with family again was exactly what I needed. The house had always been my sanctuary. Every spring, I tended the rose garden that wrapped around the front porch, the same bushes John and I had planted when the boys were small. The kitchen still smelled of cinnamon and vanilla from my weekend baking apple pies, mostly because they'd always been Matthew's favorite. In the living room, family photo albums lined the mantel above the fireplace, a chronicle of birthdays and graduations and ordinary Sundays that felt sacred now that half the people in those pictures were gone. But there was one room in this house that nobody entered. Upstairs at the end of the hall, Matthew's bedroom door stayed locked. I'd kept it exactly as it was the day he died 13 years ago. His high school wrestling trophies on the shelf, his college textbooks stacked on the desk, even his jacket still hanging on the back of the door. Every Thursday, I unlocked that door and dusted, talking to his photograph on the nightstand, like he might actually answer. "Your brother is struggling again, sweetheart," I'd whisper. "I wish you were here to guide him." Michael had moved back with Amber and the kids 3 years ago, right after he lost his job. "Just temporary, Mom," he'd promised, "until I get back on my feet." But temporary had stretched into months, then years, and I'd watched my retirement income and John's life insurance money disappear into groceries, utility bills, Emma's piano lessons, Danny's soccer equipment. Last year, I'd even used $15,000 to buy Amber a Honda CR-V because she said she needed reliable transportation for the children. I told myself this was what family did. After losing Matthew, I couldn't bear the thought of losing anyone else. And my granddaughter Emma, with her serious dark eyes and quiet intelligence, she reminded me so much of Matthew, it sometimes hurt to look at her. She has his spirit. I'd tell Michael, not noticing the way his expression would harden. The warning signs had been there for months, but I'd trained myself not to see them. Michael and Amber spoke to me less and less often, locking their bedroom door for whispered conversations that would stop the moment I walked by. Amber had developed an eye roll whenever I suggested anything, and Michael's jaw would tighten whenever I asked about his job search. Once, passing by his room, I'd heard him on his phone. "When the old woman is gone, we can finally..." But I'd convinced myself he was talking about someone else. He had to be. What I couldn't ignore was the way I'd catch myself comparing them. Matthew never made me worry like this. I'd think watching Michael sleep past noon, or I'd look at Matthew's photo and wonder aloud, If your brother were alive, he would have already found work. I never said these things to Michael directly, but somehow he knew. I'd see it in his eyes, that flash of resentment when I smiled at Matthew's picture, that clenched jaw when Emma did something that reminded me of her uncle. That Tuesday morning in late October, when Michael came rushing down the stairs waving a crumpled lottery ticket and screaming about $85 million. I actually felt a spark of hope. Maybe this would finally make him happy. Maybe he'd finally stop looking at me with those cold, resentful eyes that always seemed to ask, "Why am I never enough for you?" But I had no idea that within 3 hours, I'd be standing on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases, watching my son change the locks on my door, while my granddaughter's face appeared in the upstairs window. Tears streaming down her cheeks, mouthing the words, "I'm sorry, Grandma." Eleanor is still in her home, believing this is a moment of celebration for her son's lottery win. She has no idea that within hours she will be evicted. She is hopeful, trusting, and eager to share in Michael's happiness. Her relationship with Michael and Amber has been strained, but she attributes it to financial stress, believing money will fix everything. She is about to witness a carefully orchestrated betrayal that has been planned for months. The noise that morning was unlike anything I'd ever heard from Michael. He came thundering down the stairs at 7:30, still in his pajamas, screaming at the top of his lungs. "We won! Oh my God! We won!" Amber appeared right behind him, and they were both jumping, clutching each other, their voices echoing through the entire house. Emma and Danny came running from their rooms, and for a moment the whole house felt alive with an energy I hadn't experienced in years. Michael fell to his knees right there in the living room, holding a crumpled piece of paper to his chest, and I saw tears streaming down his face. Real tears. In all his 38 years, I'd rarely seen my son cry, certainly not like this. "Mom," he sobbed, looking up at me with an expression I wanted desperately to believe was pure joy. "Mom, we did it! $85 million! $85 million!" He thrust the lottery ticket toward me with shaking hands. I took it carefully, squinting at the numbers printed across it. So 7, 14, 21, 35, 42, 09, with a Powerball of 09. "Michael, are you certain?" I heard myself asking, even as happiness bloomed in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the answer to all his struggles, all the tension that had been building in this house for 3 years. I checked it 5 times, Mom. 5 times. It matches perfectly with last night's drawing. Every single number. He grabbed Amber's hand and pulled her close, kissing her temple. "We're set for life. The kids are set for life. Everything's finally going to be okay." I congratulated them, hugged them both, felt my own eyes welling with tears of relief. "Should we go verify it today?" I asked. "I think there's a lottery office in Detroit. We could drive there right now and—" "The lottery office is closed on Sundays, Mom," Michael interrupted quickly. Too quickly, I'd realize later. "We'll go first thing tomorrow morning. Today we just want to celebrate." Something made me look down at the ticket again. The paper felt slightly different than the lottery tickets I'd bought occasionally over the years, a bit stiffer. The texture not quite right. But I pushed the thought away immediately. Why would I doubt my own son on the happiest day of his life? What I couldn't push away was the way Amber kept looking at Michael. Not with joy exactly, but with something else. Expectation, maybe. Like she was waiting for a signal for the next part of some script only the two of them knew. I headed to the kitchen to start preparing lunch, already planning Michael's favorite roast chicken with herbs from my garden, the one I used to make for special occasions when he and Matthew were boys. But I'd barely pulled the chicken from the refrigerator when Amber appeared in the doorway, and the woman standing there bore no resemblance to the person who'd been jumping and screaming 15 minutes earlier. "Eleanor, no need to cook," she said flatly. "We're going out to a high-end restaurant. Time to start living like millionaires." Before I could respond, Michael entered behind her. His smile had vanished completely. "Mom, we need to talk about arrangements. Now that we have money, things need to change." The shift was so sudden, so complete, that I actually felt dizzy. "Arrangements," I repeated. "What kind of arrangements?" Amber's voice was cold, clinical. "About this house, about your living situation, about what's best for everyone now." And then she pulled a brochure from her back pocket. Pre-printed, professionally designed for a place called Sunny Meadows Nursing Home. The brochure was pristine, not a crease on it, like it had been carefully stored and waiting. "Mom," Michael said, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're keeping this house. We'll renovate it, make it worthy of our new status. You need to move to a senior living facility." The words didn't make sense. I looked from Michael to Amber and back again, waiting for someone to laugh to tell me this was some kind of terrible joke. "Michael, this is my house, mine and your father's. My name is on the deed." "We've already consulted a lawyer," Amber cut in smoothly. "Given your age and certain signs of confusion, we've documented forgetting to lock doors, asking the same questions repeatedly. We can petition for guardianship, but we'd rather do this nicely." She held up the Sunny Meadows brochure like it was a gift. "They accept Medicaid. You'll be comfortable there." Everything that happened next felt like it was happening to someone else. Two men in moving company uniforms appeared at the door. They'd been called, been scheduled, been part of the plan all along. I had 30 minutes to pack. 30 minutes to gather what I could from a house I'd lived in for 3 decades. I begged. I'm not proud of it, but I begged. "Michael, please. This is your home. You grew up here." "Matthew's room." At Matthew's name, something flickered across Michael's face, but he turned away, his jaw set. Amber was already on her phone calling someone. Within minutes, a locksmith van pulled up to the curb. I was crying, hands shaking as I threw clothes into suitcases. Through my bedroom window, I could see Amber heading upstairs. The hallway. The locked door at the end. Matthew's door. And then I heard it, the sound of that door opening for the first time in 13 years. When they finally walked me out, my 2 suitcases feeling impossibly heavy, I turned back for one last look. As I stood on my own front lawn, the lawn where I'd taught Matthew and Michael to ride bikes, where we'd had countless family barbecues watching Amber hand the locksmith a $100 bill to change my locks, immediately, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Emma standing at the upstairs window, her small hand pressed against the glass, and behind her, I could see into Matthew's room. The door was wide open for the first time in 13 years, and Amber was already inside, tearing down the photographs of my dead son. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about greed. This was about erasing me and everything I'd ever loved, completely. Eleanor has just been evicted from her own home. She is standing outside with only 2 suitcases, homeless and shocked. She has witnessed Amber desecrating Matthew's shrine room. She is experiencing the immediate aftermath of betrayal, humiliation, confusion, anger, but beneath it all, there's a growing awareness that perhaps she saw signs of this coming and chose to ignore them. She needs to find shelter and figure out her next move. Her relationships are shattered. Michael has revealed himself as her enemy. Amber is actively cruel, and even the neighbors are too ashamed or afraid to help. Eleanor is at her lowest point, but is about to discover she's stronger than she thought. I don't know how long I stood there on the curb, my 2 suitcases at my feet, like evidence of a crime. Long enough that Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down appeared at her window. We'd been friends for 20 years, had coffee together every Thursday morning, shared recipes and complaints about the weather and the slow decline of the neighborhood. She looked at me through her lace curtains, and I saw her face, shock, pity, maybe shame before she pulled the curtains closed. She didn't come out. She didn't call to me. She simply disappeared, and somehow that hurt almost as much as what Michael had done. Other neighbors glanced out their windows too. Mr. Robertson pretended to check his mailbox, then hurried back inside. The Johnsons' teenage daughter stared from their porch before her mother pulled her away. I was a spectacle, a cautionary tale unfolding in real time on a suburban street where everyone knew everyone else's business. The humiliation burned through me like acid. But underneath it, twisting through the shock and anger, was something else. Something I didn't want to name. Relief. Why did I feel relief? Why did part of me feel like I'd been holding my breath for months, years, even waiting for this exact moment? Why do I feel like I've been waiting for this? I whispered to no one. I pulled out my phone with hands that should have been shaking more than they were. That was another strange thing. My hands were steadier than they had any right to be. I called Linda, my best friend of 30 years, but it went straight to voicemail. Right, she was in Florida visiting her son. I scrolled through my contacts, considered calling Grace or Patricia from church, or any of the other women I'd known for decades. But my thumb hovered over their names and couldn't press down. Pride, stubborn and fierce, locked my throat. I couldn't bear to say the words out loud. My son just threw me out of my own house. My son treated me like garbage. My son chose his inheritance over his mother. I grabbed my suitcases and started walking. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stand on that curb anymore, being pitied and ignored in equal measure. The Riverside Motel was 3 miles away, a squat building with peeling paint and a flickering vacancy sign. I paid for a week with the $800 in cash. I kept in my purse for emergencies, never imagining the emergency would be this. Room 12, second floor. The stairs felt steep, the suitcases impossibly heavy. Inside, the room smelled of mold and old cigarette smoke despite the no smoking sign on the door. The bedspread was a faded floral pattern that might have been cheerful in 1987. This was my home now. I sat on the edge of the bed, and that's when the tears finally came. Not gentle crying, but great gulping sobs that shook my whole body. When I could breathe again, I opened my suitcase to find something to wear tomorrow, something to hold on to, anything familiar. That's when I saw it. My old diary from last year. The blue leather one John had given me for our 40th anniversary. I didn't remember packing it. Had I grabbed it unconsciously, or had someone, Emma, slipped it into my things? With trembling fingers, I opened it and began flipping through pages of mundane observations about gardening and grocery lists and the weather. Then I found an entry from 6 months ago, and the words on the page made my breath catch. Today I heard Michael on the phone. Don't worry when the old woman is gone. But it can't be about me. Michael couldn't. I must have misheard. I must have misheard. I stared at those words at my own handwriting, insisting I'd misheard something I clearly heard perfectly well. Below that entry, the next page had been torn out. Ragged edges remained in the binding. I touched them, trying to remember what I'd written, what had been so unbearable that I'd ripped it out entirely. The memory was there, blurry and wrong, like looking at something underwater. Had I known? Had some part of me known all along and chosen blindness instead? I kept flipping backward through months of entries and found another one from 2 years ago. John used to say I needed to see the truth about our boys. But he didn't understand. A mother knows her children. John. My husband had tried to tell me something about Michael, about both of them maybe, and I'd dismissed him. I'd insisted I knew better. A mother knows her children. Except apparently I didn't. Something hardened inside me then, like water freezing into ice. I set the diary aside and picked up my phone. My house was still in my name. Michael couldn't legally seize it in one day, no matter what Amber had said about lawyers and guardianship petitions. I opened my browser and typed, How to Protect Property Rights Michigan, then Elder Abuse Laws Michigan, then How to Prove Fraudulent Guardianship. I could call the police right now, I thought, but what would I tell them? My son kicked me out of my house. They'd call it a family dispute, tell me to work it out, maybe suggest I was confused about whose house it was. No, if I was going to fight this, I needed evidence. I needed time. And I needed Michael to believe he'd won, to feel safe enough to make mistakes. I found a small notebook in my purse and opened it to the first blank page. My hand trembled as I wrote, but my mind was clear. Michael wants me weak, so I'll show him weakness. But behind that, I paused, then continued, things I need to know. 1, is the lottery ticket real? 2, what is Michael's real plan? 3, who can I trust? I was sitting on that musty motel bed, writing down everything I could remember about Michael's behavior over the past months, trying to build a timeline, trying to understand when my son had decided to destroy me, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mrs. Patterson, this is Detective Sharon Mills, Michigan State Police. I've been investigating a lottery fraud ring, and your son's name just came up in our database. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Riverside Diner. Come alone. Don't tell Michael and Mrs. Patterson. I'm not sure how much you know, but this is bigger than you think. Eleanor spent a sleepless night in the motel processing the detective's message and the realization that Michael's lottery ticket might be fake. She's transitioning from victim to strategic thinker, though she's still emotionally raw from the betrayal. She's desperate for answers, but also wary. The detective's message suggested this conspiracy is larger than a simple family dispute. Eleanor is meeting Mills hoping for an ally, but about to discover that everyone has their own agenda, including law enforcement. She's alone, vulnerable, but her survival instincts are sharpening. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the motel bed watching the hours tick past on the digital clock, replaying Detective Mills' text message over and over. A lottery fraud ring, Michael's name in a database. Bigger than I think. At 8:30 the next morning, I walked the 6 blocks to Riverside Diner, my coat pulled tight against the October cold, scanning every car and face with a paranoia I'd never experienced before. Detective Sharon Mills was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a clear view of the entrance. She was younger than I'd imagined, from her text maybe mid-40s, with short dark hair and sharp eyes that assessed me the moment I walked through the door. She didn't stand or offer a warm greeting, just gestured to the seat across from her. Professional, efficient, not the sympathetic ally I'd been desperately hoping for. Mrs. Patterson, she said, sliding a menu toward me, though it was clear neither of us planned to eat. Thank you for coming. I'm investigating a sophisticated fraud operation, and your son's lottery ticket matches a very specific pattern we've been tracking. She pulled out a tablet and showed me photographs of lottery tickets, dozens of them. This is Jerry Kozlowski's work. He's got 2 prior fraud convictions and has perfected the art of creating fake winning tickets. See here. She zoomed in on one image. The paper type is slightly older stock, probably from 2018. The ink fades just a fraction faster than authentic tickets, and the serial numbers follow a pattern always ending in double digits that match the Powerball number. I stared at the tickets and my stomach turned. Michael's ticket. Those numbers. How much do these cost? Between $5,000 and $15,000 depending on the claimed jackpot amount. Kozlowski sells them to desperate people who want an excuse for sudden wealth, or, she looked at me directly, people who want to manipulate family members. Create a scenario where they suddenly have leverage. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to understand something. Mills leaned forward, her voice dropping. I'm hunting big fish. Michael is a small fish. If I arrest him right now, the entire network disappears. I need your cooperation to bring down the whole operation. My throat went dry. What kind of cooperation? She pulled out a folder and spread documents across the table. Bank statements. Transaction records. 3 weeks ago, your son withdrew $15,000 from a joint account. Did you know you had a joint account with Michael? I stared at the papers. My name was right there along with Michael's on an account I'd never opened, never signed for. I don't understand. He forged your signature when he moved back in 3 years ago, Mills said flatly. We found emails between him and Kozlowski. $5,000 went to buying the fake ticket. The other $10,000 went to what's listed as professional document services. Mrs. Patterson, that's a front for people who forge medical evaluations, power of attorney, papers, and wills. The diner suddenly felt too hot, too small. Michael doesn't just want to kick you out, Mills continued. He wants complete legal control, make you incompetent in the eyes of the law. And if necessary what? My voice came out as a whisper. Mills was silent for several seconds, and in that silence, I heard everything she wasn't saying. We're still investigating, but the document forgers Michael hired have been linked to 3 suspicious deaths of elderly people over the past 5 years. Not enough evidence to prosecute anyone, but the pattern is there. She showed me another document, a list of potential charges: fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy, forgery. Michael could face 10 to 20 years, but only if we can connect him to the larger network and prove premeditation. And there it was. The real reason she'd contacted me. You want me to be bait? Mills had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. I want you to continue your normal behavior while we gather evidence. Let Michael think his plan is working. You'll monitor from a safe distance while my son, who apparently has connections to people who kill elderly parents, has complete access to me. My voice was steadier than I felt. Detective Mills, if I'm going to be bait, I need protection, real protection. And I need to ensure Michael goes to prison for a very long time, not just a few years on a plea deal. She studied me for a long moment, and I saw her reassessment happening in real time. You're not like the other elderly victims I've worked with. All right, Mrs. Patterson, I'll arrange for protection, but you have to do exactly as I say. No deviations from the plan. I nodded, but inside I was thinking, no, I'll do what I need to do. You have your plan, detective, and I'll have mine. One more question, I said. If Michael is planning something worse than just taking my house, what's the typical timeline? How long before he acts? Mill's expression darkened. Based on similar cases, 2 to 4 weeks. Once they've established the fake scenario, they need to move quickly before the victim figures it out or gets legal help. Time is always their enemy. 2 to 4 weeks. I had 2 to 4 weeks to stop my son from potentially killing me. I walked out of that diner realizing I couldn't trust Detective Mills to put my safety first. She wanted her big case, and I was just a tool. But before I could even process how to handle this alone, I saw him, Michael, sitting in his car across the street, watching me through dark sunglasses, phone pressed to his ear, and I knew in that instant that he'd been tracking me somehow, which meant he might know about Mills, which meant my timeline had just collapsed, and whatever he was planning to do to me, he was going to do it soon. Eleanor has just discovered Michael is surveilling her. She's walked back to the motel, adrenaline pumping, mind racing. She's no longer just a victim. She's becoming strategic, calculating. She knows Michael is tracking her movements, but doesn't yet know how. She has Detective Mills as a reluctant ally, but doesn't fully trust her. Eleanor is transitioning from defensive to offensive mode, realizing she needs to build her own case, gather her own evidence, and create her own support network. She's scared, but also discovering a strength she didn't know she had. Her relationship with Michael has transformed from mother-son to adversaries in a dangerous game. The moment I got back to the motel room, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. How had Michael known where I was? How had he found me at that specific diner at that specific time? I pulled out my phone with shaking hands and started checking every app, every setting, every permission. That's when I found it, Family Locator. I'd completely forgotten about it. 6 months ago, Michael had suggested we all install it for safety, Mom, in case something happens to you or the kids. I'd agreed without thinking, twice touched that he cared. Now I understood. He'd been planning this for at least 6 months, laying groundwork, making sure he could always find me. My first instinct was to delete it immediately, but my hand froze over the uninstall button. If I removed it now, Michael would know I'd figured out he was tracking me. He'd know I was more aware, more capable than he wanted to believe. No, I needed him to think I was still that naive old woman who trusted her son completely. I needed him confident and careless. I grabbed my purse and walked 3 blocks to a convenience store, paid $40 cash for a prepaid phone that required no identification, no contract, no trail. Back in my room, I created a simple plan. My old phone would follow a predictable, non-threatening routine. Library, grocery store, church. The kind of places a confused, displaced elderly woman might go. But my new phone that would be my real weapon. I spent the rest of the afternoon at the public library using their computers to research Jerry Kozlowski. I found newspaper articles from 5 years ago about a fraud case, another from 8 years ago. The man had a pattern, and Michael had found him. I also searched for elder rights attorneys and found Martha Blackwood, 70 years old, 30 years of experience specializing in protecting vulnerable adults from financial exploitation. I sent her an email from a library account laying out everything that had happened. Within 20 minutes, she responded, "I'll take your case pro bono. What you're describing is serious elder abuse. Can you come to my office tomorrow at 10? Martha and I spoke by phone that evening using my burner. Her voice was sharp, clear, no nonsense. "Eleanor, we need to file an emergency motion to freeze all transactions related to your property. We'll request immediate court protection of your assets, but I need to warn you Michael will counter by claiming you lack mental capacity. We need ironclad evidence that you're completely lucid." "I understand," I said. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Documentation. Recordings if you can get them. Witnesses. We're building a case and we need to be meticulous." I'd already started. After leaving the library, I'd gone to a different bank, one Michael didn't know about, and opened a safety deposit box with $300 withdrawn from an old account John had set up for me years ago. I placed copies of everything there, the fake lottery ticket numbers, Detective Mills's contact information, my diary entries, bank statements, showing Michael's withdrawals. If something happened to me, there would be evidence. The next afternoon, my old phone rang. Amber. I let it ring 3 times before answering, making sure to turn on the call recording feature first. "Hello, Mom." Her voice dripped with artificial sweetness. "We've been so worried about you. Where are you? Are you okay? Do you need money? We can help you know. We're family." Every word was a test, a probe to see what I knew, what I planned to do. I forced my voice to sound weak, defeated. "Dear, I just want peace. I'm old. Maybe going to a nursing home is good. I don't want to cause trouble for you and Michael." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Oh, Mom, I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. We really do want what's best for you. And you'll be so much happier at Sunny Meadows with people your own age with professional care." "I know, dear, I know." I paused, then added, "How are the children? How's the house?" "Oh, the house is wonderful. We've already started renovations, knocking down that wall between the living room and dining room just like we always wanted. It's going to be beautiful." My heart seized. They'd already started renovations on my house, without legal ownership, without permission, without any right. "That sounds lovely," I managed to say. After we hung up, I immediately sent the recording to Martha. Her response came within minutes. "They just gave us trespassing, property damage, and unauthorized entry. This is good, Eleanor. This is very good." That night, as I lay in my motel bed, reviewing everything I'd learned, feeling for the first time like I had some control, I received a video message on my burner phone from a number I didn't recognize. The screen showed Emma, my granddaughter, filming secretly from inside her bedroom closet. Her face streaked with tears, and what she whispered into the camera made my blood run cold. "Grandma, I heard Daddy and Mommy talking tonight. The lottery ticket was always fake. They planned this for months. They have papers that say you're crazy. And Grandma, I heard Daddy say something else about Uncle Matthew. Something I don't understand. He said—" The video cut off abruptly, and when I tried to call back, the number was disconnected. Eleanor is desperate to reconnect with Emma after the video cut off. She's discovered her granddaughter knows more than anyone suspected and is potentially in danger for trying to help. Eleanor is now fighting on two fronts, protecting herself and protecting Emma. She's becoming more strategic and bold, but also more aware of the depths of Michael and Amber's conspiracy. She needs to find a way to communicate with Emma safely while avoiding Michael's surveillance. Her emotional state is complex. She's horrified by what she's learning, but also grateful to have an ally, even if that ally is a terrified 10-year-old child. I stared at that disconnected number for 20 minutes, trying everything I could think of to trace it back to reach Emma again. Nothing worked. She'd used a burner app, something disposable, that vanished the moment she ended the recording. My granddaughter was 10 years old and already knew how to cover her digital tracks. What kind of household had I allowed my family to become? The next morning, I took a risk. Using my burner phone, I created a Snapchat account with a username only Emma would recognize, Rose Garden in 1959, the year John and I planted those roses she'd helped me tend every spring. I sent a message to an account I found under her full name, praying Michael and Amber weren't monitoring it, praying Emma would understand. "Sweetheart, it's Grandma. Are you safe? I need to know what you were going to say." 3 hours passed. 3 hours of me sitting in that motel room, staring at my phone, jumping at every notification that wasn't from her. Then finally, "Grandma, is it really you? I'm using my old iPad. I hide it in my closet. Mommy and Daddy don't know about it." My hands shook as I typed back. "It's really me, Emma. I'm safe. Tell me everything you know." What she told me over the next hour, in fragments and whispers and messages she kept deleting immediately after I confirmed I'd read them, painted a picture so much darker than I'd imagined. She'd been overhearing conversations since July, 3 months of her parents planning my destruction. "Daddy said you were getting too old, too much of a burden," she wrote. "They needed a big shock to make you leave voluntarily. The fake lottery ticket was Mommy's idea. She said it would give them a legitimate reason so the neighbors wouldn't think they're bad people. Emma, why didn't you tell me sooner?" Her response took several minutes to come through, and when it did, I understood the terrible weight this child had been carrying. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I was scared. If I told Daddy would do something to me, but also, I wanted things. Mommy promised me a new iPhone expensive dance camp. I thought if you went to the nursing home, my life would be easier. I didn't know they wanted to kill you." Kill you. She'd written it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, like it was an established fact she'd only recently discovered. My 10-year-old granddaughter had known her parents were plotting against me and had chosen silence because she wanted dance camp. I wanted to be angry at her, but she was just a child, manipulated by people who should have protected her innocence. "Emma, you're not responsible for your parents' choices. Tell me what else you heard." The details came flooding out then. Michael owed $85,000 to a loan shark, the exact amount of his fake lottery win. He had 3 months to pay until the end of December, or they'd threatened to deal with the family. He'd been gambling online for 2 years, bleeding money into poker sites and sports betting, always chasing the big win that would solve everything. 2 months ago, he'd tried to forge my signature to take out a mortgage on the house, but I'd caught the bank notification and stopped it. That's when they'd decided I needed to be eliminated entirely. And Grandma Mommy isn't just doing this for money. She has plans to turn the house into a luxury Airbnb. She's already hired a designer. She talks about making $8,000 or $10,000 every month. She keeps saying something weird, too. She says, "This house should have been mine from the beginning. It was meant for my daughter." I don't understand what she means. Neither did I, but the possessiveness in Amber's words, the strange entitlement sent chills through me. This house should have been mine from the beginning. What did that mean? Emma's next message made my blood run cold. "Grandma, if you try to sue them, they have papers from Dr. Harrison saying you have dementia." Mommy showed me the file. It says you forget to close doors, get confused about dates, ask the same questions over and over. But Grandma, I know that's not true. I live with you. You never did any of those things. Fake medical records, with a doctor's signature. They'd thought of everything. And Grandma, I heard Daddy tell Mommy that if you fight back too much, they'll need help to handle it faster. His voice was so scary when he said it. Like he wasn't my daddy anymore. I had to stop reading for a moment to breathe. My son planning to murder me. My son whom I'd raised, fed, loved, protected. My son who thought I'd loved his brother more. Emma's final message appeared. "Grandma, one more thing. They were talking about Uncle Matthew last night. Daddy said she loved him more anyway, so maybe she should join him. What does that mean?" I closed my eyes. Michael wanted me dead, and he wanted to frame it as me reuniting with my beloved Matthew, the son I'd mourned for 13 years, the son I'd built a shrine for, the son who, according to Michael's twisted logic, I'd always loved more. I thanked Emma and made her promise to delete all messages and stay safe. But as soon as our chat ended, my other phone, the one Michael was tracking, buzzed with a notification. I'd been added to a group chat called Mom's Care Team, and the first message from someone named Dr. Richard Harrison read, "Dear family, after my examination this morning, I must recommend immediate psychiatric evaluation for Eleanor. She exhibited signs of paranoid delusion, confusion, and potential harm to self. I've scheduled her for intake at Sunny Meadows on Friday at 2 p.m. Please bring her. No need for her to pack much, the facility provides everything." And below it, Michael had replied, "Thanks, Doc. We'll have her there. Whatever it takes to keep Mom safe." But here was the problem. I had never seen Dr. Harrison today. I hadn't seen him in 6 months. This was a completely fabricated medical report. Eleanor has just received a fake medical report claiming she was examined today when she wasn't. She's shocked, but also recognizing a pattern. Michael is building a false paper trail to have her declared incompetent. She's in her motel room holding evidence of medical fraud. She's moved beyond fear into strategic action mode. She has Martha as her attorney and Detective Mills investigating, but she's learned not to rely entirely on others. She needs to act fast because Michael has scheduled her involuntary commitment to Sunny Meadows for Friday, only days away. She's angry, scared, but also sharply focused. Her relationship with Michael has moved from betrayal to open warfare. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely dial Dr. Harrison's office number. I'd been his patient for 12 years, trusted him with every health concern, every prescription, every worry about aging. And now he was lying about examining me, creating false records to help my son steal everything I had. The receptionist answered on the third ring. I steadied my voice and said, "Hello, this is Eleanor Patterson. I'm calling to confirm my appointment details from this morning." There was a pause, the sound of keyboard clicking. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm showing no record of you coming in today. In fact, your last visit was in April, 6 months ago. Did Dr. Harrison see you somewhere else?" I turned on my phone's recording feature. "So you're confirming I was not at your office this morning. I did not have any examination today." "That's correct, ma'am. Would you like to schedule an appointment?" I thanked her and ended the call, then immediately forwarded the recording to Martha Blackwood. Her response came within minutes. "This is serious medical fraud. Get yourself to another doctor now for a legitimate cognitive evaluation. We need proof you're competent." Within 2 hours, I was sitting in the community health center with Dr. Susan Chen, a calm woman in her 40s who listened carefully as I explained why I needed an urgent mental status examination. She conducted what she called a mini mental state examination, asking me to remember words, draw shapes, answer questions about time and place. When she finished, she looked at me with something like respect. "Mrs. Patterson, you scored 29 out of 30. That's excellent for any age, let alone 65. Your cognitive function is completely normal. Can you document that in writing today? I'll have the report ready in an hour." Martha filed the emergency motion that afternoon. 2 petitions simultaneously, a temporary restraining order to stop Michael and Amber from touching my property, and a formal complaint reporting Dr. Harrison's medical fraud. She also filed my affidavit, a sworn statement, detailing everything: the fake lottery ticket, the eviction, Michael's financial manipulation, and now the fabricated medical report. The court scheduled an emergency hearing for Friday, 5 days away. "Eleanor, Martha warned me over the phone, at that hearing you need to appear completely competent. One confused answer, one moment of uncertainty, and the judge might side with Michael. Can you do that?" "I can do that," I said, and I meant it. But Michael wasn't going to make it easy. Within 24 hours of receiving the court papers, he'd hired Maxwell Crane, an attorney I recognized from news articles, the kind of lawyer who won cases by any means necessary. Michael filed a counterpetition requesting emergency guardianship, claiming I had severely deteriorating mental health and paranoid thinking. His evidence was elaborate: Dr. Harrison's fake report, a journal Michael claimed to have kept for 3 months, documenting my abnormal behavior, and testimony from Amber stating I'd forgotten to turn off the stove, wandered at night, and talked to dead people. All lies, every single word. Martha called me that evening, her voice tight. "Eleanor, Michael is also trying to have Dr. Chen's evaluation dismissed as biased because you sought it out yourself after becoming paranoid. He's building a narrative where everything you do to defend yourself is proof of your mental illness. What do? We prove Michael is a fraud. We have 5 days." I was sitting in Martha's office the next morning, trying to comprehend how my own son could fabricate such elaborate lies about me when Detective Mills called with news that sent chills down my spine. "Mrs. Patterson, we just raided Jerry Kozlowski's apartment. We found the fake lottery ticket operation and something else, a ledger. Your son didn't just buy one forged document. He bought 3: the fake lottery ticket, the psychiatric evaluation, and something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Patterson, we need you to come to the station right now. There's something you need to see, and I don't think you should be alone when you see it. Eleanor is in Martha's office when she receives Mill's urgent call. She's been fighting the legal battle for several days, gathering evidence building her case. She knows Michael bought the fake lottery ticket and the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, but she's about to discover there's a third document, something even more sinister. She's mentally preparing herself for whatever Mills needs to show her, though she's exhausted from the constant revelations of her son's betrayal. Martha accompanies her to the police station. Eleanor is no longer naive. She expects the worst, but still hopes she's wrong. She's determined, strategic, but also deeply wounded. Her relationship with Mills has evolved into cautious cooperation. Martha drove me to this police station in silence. We both knew that whatever Detective Mills had found, it was bad enough that she didn't want me to hear it alone. When we arrived, Mills was waiting in an interrogation room with folders spread across the table and a man in handcuffs sitting in the corner. Jerry Kozlowski, I assumed the architect of Michael's fake lottery ticket. Mills gestured for us to sit. We arrested Jerry this morning, found everything in his apartment, printing equipment, specialized paper, a complete operation. He's facing 15 to 20 years, so he's agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. She opened one of the folders. Jerry kept meticulous records, emails with your son dating back to July, discussing the lottery ticket in detail. Phone recordings, Jerry records all his clients to protect himself. In one call, Michael asked about options for a more permanent solution to the old woman problem. I felt Martha's hand grip mine under the table. But here's what you need to know, Mills continued. Michael isn't a first-time customer. 18 months ago, he bought fake proof of income documents to secure a loan. Your son is familiar with deception, Mrs. Patterson. This isn't desperation, it's calculated fraud. Jerry spoke up from his corner, his voice raspy. Lady, your son paid me 15 grand total, 5 for the lottery ticket, 5 for the psychiatric evaluation, and 5 for something else. He glanced at Mills. Show her. Mills pulled out a document and slid it across the table. It was a will. My will. Except I'd never written it. The date was 6 months in the future, and it left everything, the house, the remaining insurance money, all my possessions to Michael upon my natural death. This was created to be discovered after you died, Mills said quietly. Backdated to look like you wrote it while still competent before the supposed onset of dementia. Patterson, this will was created with a specific timeline. Michael was planning for you to die within 6 months. The room tilted. Martha's voice seemed to come from far away. This isn't just fraud anymore. This is conspiracy to commit murder. I forced myself to read the document. Near the bottom, one line made bile rise in my throat. Matthew's room and belongings to be immediately cleared and house renovated per new owner's discretion. They were planning to erase Matthew completely, erase me, completely erase everything that had ever mattered in that house. He was going to kill me, I heard myself say. My son was actually going to kill me. Mills leaned forward. Mrs. Patterson, I'm recommending protective custody immediately. We postpone the hearing, build the criminal case. No. The word came out stronger than I felt. If I disappear, Michael's lawyer will claim I'm mentally unstable and paranoid. We'll lose the house case even if Michael goes to prison. Martha started to protest, but I cut her off. I'm not hiding. I'll go to Sunny Meadows on Friday like they want. Wire the place with cameras. Station undercover officers. If they try anything, you'll catch them. Mills looked at me like I'd lost my mind. You're proposing to use yourself as bait. I'm 65 years old, I said. I've buried my husband, buried one son, and discovered my other son wants me dead. I'm not afraid of dying. I'm only afraid of dying without knowing why. Why does Michael hate me this much? I need to understand. The room was silent for a long moment. Finally, Mills nodded. All right. But conditions you wear a hidden microphone and panic button. Officers in adjacent rooms. Martha attends as your legal representative. And if anything feels wrong, we pull you out immediately. And we spent the next 3 days preparing what Martha called the most dangerous legal strategy I've ever approved, wiring Sunny Meadows with hidden cameras, briefing undercover officers rehearsing my role as the confused elderly woman. But on Thursday night, 24 hours before I was supposed to check into the facility, I received a package at my motel, no return address. Just a plain brown box, and inside was something that made my hands shake and my heart nearly stop. Matthew's old wristwatch, the one he was wearing when he died 13 years ago. The one that should have been buried with him, and attached to it was a note in Michael's handwriting that read, "You should have loved me the way you loved him." Now it's time you understood what I've been carrying all these years. Tomorrow, Mom, tomorrow you'll finally know the truth. Eleanor is alone in her motel room holding Matthew's watch, an object that should be in a grave. She's horrified, confused, and realizes Michael is about to reveal something terrible about Matthew's death. Tomorrow is supposed to be the nursing home trap, but this watch changes everything. Michael is forcing a confrontation tonight. Eleanor knows she needs to record whatever Michael tells her. It could be the final piece of evidence. She's terrified, but also desperate to finally understand why Michael became this person. Her plan with Mills and Martha is still in place for tomorrow, but tonight she's on her own, facing the darkest truth of her family's history. I held Matthew's watch in my trembling hands, turning it over to see the engraving I'd had inscribed for his 21st birthday. To my perfect son, love, Mom. The scratch across the crystal face was exactly as I remembered it, the distinctive mark he'd gotten playing high school football. This was Matthew's watch. There was no question. With shaking fingers, I called the funeral home, the same one that had handled Matthew's burial 13 years ago. The night manager found the records and confirmed what I already knew. Yes, Mrs. Patterson, our records show the deceased was buried wearing a wristwatch, gold band silver face. It's specifically noted in the inventory. So Michael had gone back. He'd dug up his brother's grave, reached into the coffin, and taken this watch from Matthew's dead wrist. The thought made my stomach turn. But beneath the horror was a worse realization. What else had happened that day? What else didn't I know about Matthew's death? I picked up my phone and called Michael before I could lose my nerve. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the surprise in his voice. "Mom, I thought you'd run by now." "Michael, we need to talk about Matthew, about the watch, and about the truth you've hidden from me for 13 years. I activated the recording on both phones, my tracked one obviously, and the burner hidden in my pocket. Whatever he said next, I needed evidence. There was a long silence. Then, "You want the truth? Fine. Matthew didn't die in an accident." My heart started pounding so hard I could barely breathe. "What are you saying?" His voice came out broken, trembling with anger and pain that had been festering for over a decade. 13 years ago, Matthew and I were driving home from a party. We argued about money. I needed $5,000 to pay gambling debts, and he refused. I said, "Why do you always get everything and I get nothing?" And Matthew laughed, Mom. He actually laughed. He said, "Because I deserve it and you're a failure, Michael. Mom knows it. Dad knows it. Even you know it." I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. I lost control. I grabbed the steering wheel. The car skidded and hit a pole. Matthew died instantly. I only had minor injuries. I told the police my brother lost control in the snow, and everyone believed me because Matthew was the perfect one who never made mistakes. "You killed your brother," I whispered. "It wasn't intentional." His voice rose defensive and desperate. "But do you know what the worst part is? At the funeral I heard you. I was standing right behind you when you hugged Matthew's coffin and said, 'Why couldn't it have been Michael? Why did it have to be my perfect son?' You thought I didn't hear that." The words hit me like a physical blow because they were true. In my overwhelming grief, I had said exactly that, never knowing Michael was there, never imagining those words would poison him for 13 years. 3 days after the burial. Michael continued, his voice breaking now. "I went back to the cemetery alone, at night. I dug up just enough to reach his body and took the watch you gave him with that inscription praising him. I kept it for 13 years as a reminder that I killed the son you loved and you still loved him more than me. Every time I looked at it, I felt the guilt mixed with rage that even in death, Matthew won." "So this isn't just about money?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Money?" He laughed bitterly. "Mom, I wanted to erase you. Destroy Matthew's room, sell that house, and finally be free of both of you. Free of the guilt, free of the comparison, free of wondering if I should have died instead of him. And yes, part of me wanted you to feel what I've felt, abandoned, unwanted, like you don't belong in your own life." The call ended abruptly, and I sat there shaking the recorder still running, knowing I'd just captured Michael's confession, not just to planning my murder, but to causing Matthew's death. But before I could call Martha or Mills, there was a knock on my motel room door, slow, deliberate 3 times, and when I looked through the peephole, my heart stopped. It was Amber standing there with a small black bag in her hand, and behind her, I could see Michael's car in the parking lot with the engine running, and I knew with absolute certainty they weren't waiting until tomorrow. They were here to finish me now tonight before I could use Michael's confession against him. Eleanor is alone in her motel room facing immediate danger. Amber is at her door with what Eleanor suspects contains lethal materials. Michael is waiting in the car outside. Eleanor has just recorded Michael's confession and knows they've come to silence her before she can use it. However, Eleanor isn't the helpless victim they think she is. She's been preparing for exactly this scenario with Martha and Mills. She has a defense kit, emergency numbers ready, and most importantly, she has evidence. She's terrified, but also clear-headed. This is the moment where all her planning either saves her life or fails. She knows help is minutes away if she can just stay alive long enough. I didn't open the door. Martha had prepared me for exactly this scenario if they came early, if they deviated from the plan, if I felt threatened. I grabbed my burner phone and dialed 911 first, keeping the line open, then immediately called Detective Mills. "Mom," Amber's voice came through the door, artificially sweet and concerned. "We're here to bring you medicine to help you sleep well. We know you've been stressed. Just open the door." I spoke loudly, making sure the 911 operator could hear every word. "I don't need medicine. I know what you're planning to do. I've recorded Michael confessing everything to killing Matthew to planning to murder me, and police are on their way." There was a pause. Then Michael's voice, and this time there was no pretense of concern. "Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Open the door." They tried the handle, then I heard the sound of a shoulder hitting wood. They were trying to break in. I grabbed the defense kit Martha had given me, pepper spray in one hand, and with the other, I activated the 120 decibel personal alarm. The sound exploded through the motel, piercing and relentless, and I heard doors opening up and down the corridor. "Help!" I screamed. "Someone is trying to break into my room. Call 911. Within minutes, I heard sirens. Local police arrived, first officers who hadn't been briefed on my case, who knew nothing about Michael or Amber, or the conspiracy Mills had been investigating. And Amber, brilliant actress, that she was transformed instantly. When the officers approached, she was crying, wringing her hands. "Officer, thank God you're here. That's my mother-in-law in there. She has dementia. She's paranoid. She thinks we want to hurt her." Amber pulled out papers from her purse, copies of Dr. Harrison's fake medical report. "We just want to take her to the hospital for evaluation. We love her. We're trying to help." Michael stood beside her, his face the perfect mask of a concerned son. "She's not safe living alone. We're just trying to do the right thing." One of the officers looked at me through my partially opened door. "Ma'am, do you need medical attention?" "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But I request you check the bag that woman is carrying. Inside are drugs and syringes. They came here to kill me, not help me." The officer hesitated. "Ma'am, without probable cause or a warrant, we can't search." "Check the ledger," a voice interrupted. Detective Mills was striding across the parking lot, her badge held high. "Michael Patterson, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy to commit murder." Everything happened quickly after that. Mills had brought the arrest warrant, had the evidence from Jerry Kozlowski's ledger, had the recordings of Michael's confession I'd already forwarded to her. As officers moved to handcuff Michael, another car pulled up, and Linda rushed out, still wearing her travel clothes, from the flight from Florida. She saw Amber and stopped dead. Amber Chen. You're Amber Chen." Amber's face went pale. "I don't know who you're talking about." Linda turned to me, her voice urgent. "Eleanor, don't you know? This is Matthew's ex-girlfriend?" She dated Matthew 8 years ago before he died. Matthew broke up with her after he discovered she'd stolen money from him. The parking lot seemed to tilt. "What?" Mill's eyes sharpened with understanding. "So Amber didn't approach Michael randomly. This is planned revenge." Something in Amber snapped. She stopped pretending, stopped acting, and screamed with a fury that came from years of festering hatred. "Matthew abandoned me. He humiliated me. He told everyone I was a thief. I only took what I deserved." Linda's face was pale as she pulled me aside, while officers restrained Amber. Her whisper was urgent and terrified. "Eleanor, when Matthew dated Amber, it was 2012. He broke up with her in October 2012. But Eleanor Amber was pregnant. I only found out years later through a mutual friend. Amber had Matthew's baby. And, Eleanor, I think that baby is Emma. I think your granddaughter is actually Matthew's daughter, not Michael's. Eleanor has just survived an attempted attack. Michael and Amber are being arrested. She's processing the shock that Emma might be Matthew's biological daughter, which would explain so many things. Emma's resemblance to Matthew, Amber's obsession with the house being, for my daughter, the entire revenge plot. Eleanor is back in her motel room with Linda, trying to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. She's emotionally exhausted, but also discovering painful truths about everyone she thought she knew. Linda is about to confess her own betrayal, which will be another blow to Eleanor's ability to trust anyone. So, back in my motel room, after the police had taken Michael and Amber away, Linda sat across from me and explained everything she knew. Matthew had dated Amber for 6 months in 2012, broke up with her in October after discovering she'd stolen $8,000 from his bank account. A mutual acquaintance had told Linda years later that Amber had been pregnant when Matthew ended things, but Matthew died in the accident before ever knowing about the baby. Emma was born in March 2015, Linda said quietly. The timeline matches perfectly, Eleanor. I never told you because Matthew was already gone, and I didn't want to add to your pain, and I wasn't completely certain. But now, seeing Amber's entire revenge plan, it all makes sense. I tried to process it. Emma wasn't Michael's daughter. She was Matthew's. Michael had raised his dead brother's child for 10 years without knowing. That's why Emma looked so much like Matthew. That's why Amber had always been more protective of Emma than Danny. That's why the forged will specifically mentioned securing inheritance for Emma. This wasn't just about greed or revenge. Amber had spent years positioning Matthew's daughter to claim what Amber believed should have been hers. "Eleanor," Linda said, and something in her voice made me look up. Her face was streaked with tears. "I have something else to confess. I did something terrible." She explained haltingly that 2 years ago she'd purchased a life insurance policy with me as the insured and herself as the beneficiary. $150,000 that would pay out when I died. "You bought insurance on my life." The words came out flat, emotionless, because I'd passed the point where I could feel shock anymore. "I'm 68 years old," Linda sobbed. "I live on $1,100 a month from Social Security. My rent is $850. That leaves $250 for everything else: food, medicine, utilities, everything. I have no savings. I'm terrified every day that I'll end up homeless. I thought you'd live to 85, 90 naturally, and when you passed, I'd have enough to survive my final years. So you were willing to let me die faster for money." Linda's face crumpled. "When Amber called me 2 months ago asking about signs of your mental decline, I should have warned you immediately, but I stayed silent because part of me thought, if you went to a nursing home, maybe you'd pass sooner. Eleanor, I'm a monster. I'm no better than Amber." I looked at this woman who'd been my best friend for 30 years, and I understood her fear, because I'd lived it myself, the terror of being old and poor and invisible. "Linda, I understand your fear, but the difference is I didn't use my friends to escape it. We're all desperate, but some of us stay human." She pulled out the insurance papers with shaking hands. "I'll cancel the policy, and I'll testify against Amber. She called me. I recorded our conversations. It's the least I can do." I studied her elderly frail with genuine terror in her eyes about her own future. "I accept your testimony. But Linda, after this case is over, I don't think we can be friends anymore. Not because I hate you, but because I can't trust you anymore." She nodded, devastated but accepting. "But I'll help you apply for housing assistance and food stamps," I added, "because that's what Matthew would have done. He was always better at forgiveness than I was." Linda left with the insurance papers, and I sat alone trying to process everything. My son was a murderer. My daughter-in-law was my dead son's revenge-seeking ex. My best friend had bet on my death. And my granddaughter was actually my other son's child. When Linda called back, voice shaking, "Eleanor, I need to tell you one more thing about Matthew. Something I should have told you 20 years ago, but I was too afraid. Matthew, he wasn't the person you thought he was. And I think you need to know the truth about what he did to Michael before you decide how to feel about all of this. Can I come back? Because what I have to tell you, it's going to change everything you thought you knew about your sons." Eleanor has learned the devastating truth from Linda about Matthew's bullying of Michael. She's had several days to process this before the emergency guardianship hearing. She now understands Michael's hatred has roots deeper than she imagined. Matthew wasn't the perfect son she thought he was, and she enabled his cruelty by refusing to see it. Eleanor is preparing to face Michael in court, armed with this painful knowledge. She's resolved to use the truth, all of it, including her own failures, to break through Michael's defenses and make him confess publicly. She's no longer just fighting for her house or her freedom. She's fighting for some kind of truth and accountability for the entire broken family system she helped create. Linda came back that night and told me everything. How she'd witnessed Matthew mocking Michael in front of their high school friends, calling him the failure and the ugly twin. How Matthew would pretend to help Michael study, but deliberately teach him wrong answers so Michael would fail tests. How Matthew, drunk at a party Linda attended, had said with casual cruelty, "Michael deserves to be treated that way. He needs to know his place." I sat there listening, and with every word the shrine I'd built to Matthew's memory crumbled a little more. My perfect son had been a bully, and I'd never seen it because I hadn't wanted to see it. 5 days later, I walked into Judge Patricia Moreno's courtroom for the emergency guardianship hearing. Michael's lawyer, Maxwell Crane, presented me as a mentally declining woman suffering from paranoid delusions. He had Dr. Harrison's fabricated report, Michael's journal of my supposed confused behavior, and Amber's tearful testimony about how worried they'd been about me. Michael took the stand, and he played his role perfectly. "Your Honor, I love my mother. I just want her safe. She's been having strange thoughts lately, saying I want to harm her. That's not true. I only want her properly cared for." Judge Moreno's expression was sympathetic. I could see the hearing tilting in Michael's favor. But then Martha stood and made an unusual request. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Linda Morrison as a witness, and then I'd like to allow Mrs. Patterson to address her son directly." Linda took the stand sworn in and began to dismantle the narrative I'd built for decades. She testified about witnessing Matthew's cruelty, about the systematic bullying, about the night Matthew told her that Michael deserved to be treated as less than. "Your Honor," Linda said, her voice steady, "Matthew was a bully, and Eleanor never saw it because she didn't want to see it." I felt every eye in the courtroom turn to me, but I didn't deny it. How could I? Then it was my turn. I stood and looked directly at Michael. "Do you remember your 10th birthday party with Matthew?" Michael looked confused. "Mom, this isn't the time. I gave Matthew a watch engraved to my perfect son. Do you know what I gave you? A book about how to be successful. Because I thought you needed it and Matthew didn't." My voice was shaking but firm. 13 years ago, you asked me, "Why don't you love me like you love him?" And I said I loved you both the same. But that was a lie, wasn't it? I loved Matthew more, and you knew it. Michael stood up and his lawyer tried to pull him back down, but something had broken open in my son. "Yes," he shouted. "I knew I always knew. Every time you looked at me, I saw you thinking, why couldn't it be Matthew? Even now, 13 years after he died, you still love him more than me. You want the truth?" Michael's voice rose, tears streaming. "Matthew died because of me. I grabbed the steering wheel, and for 1 second before the car hit the pole, I felt relieved. Because finally, I'd be the only son." The courtroom went completely silent. "But even after he died, you still didn't see me," Michael continued, beyond stopping now. "You kept his room like a shrine, so yes, I wanted you gone. I wanted to destroy Matthew's room and erase every trace of you and him, because if I couldn't be loved, I'd destroy the love you had for him." Detective Mills stood from the gallery. "Michael Patterson, you're under arrest for voluntary manslaughter in the death of Matthew Patterson, conspiracy to murder Eleanor Patterson, and fraud." Emma suddenly appeared at the courtroom doors crying, "Daddy, no!" And I saw Martha intercept her, whispering something in her ear, and Emma's face transformed from tears to shock as she looked at me, then at Amber being led away in handcuffs. And I knew Martha had just told Emma the truth about her parentage, that she wasn't Michael's daughter, but Matthew's. And in that moment, 3 generations of our family's lies and secrets came crashing down. And I realized that the destruction wasn't just about greed or revenge. It was about a family that had spent decades building houses of cards with love used as weapons instead of shelter. Connection to previous part. The previous section ended with, "As the bailiffs moved to restrain Michael, as he looked at me one last time, with a mixture of hatred, relief, and something that looked almost like gratitude for finally being able to tell the truth." Emma ran into the courtroom, and I saw Martha intercept her, whispering something in her ear, and Emma's face transformed from tears to shock as she looked at me, then at Amber being led away in handcuffs. And I knew Martha had just told Emma the truth about her parentage, that she wasn't Michael's daughter, but Matthew's. And in that moment, 3 generations of our family's lies and secrets came crashing down. And I realized that the destruction wasn't just about greed or revenge. It was about a family that had spent decades building houses of cards, with love used as weapons instead of shelter. Current context. The courtroom drama is over. Michael has been arrested and confessed publicly to killing Matthew. Eleanor has won the legal battle. The guardianship petition is dismissed. Her property is secure. But she feels no triumph, only the weight of her own complicity in creating this tragedy. She's going with Martha to secure her documents and finalize the legal victory. But Eleanor knows there's one more confession she needs to make. Not to save herself, but to finally take responsibility for her role in destroying her family. She's exhausted, broken, but also strangely liberated by the prospect of telling the complete truth, even if it means facing consequences. After the bailiffs took Michael away and the courtroom cleared, Martha and I went to the bank where I'd stored everything in the safety deposit box. The legal battle was over. I'd won. The house was mine. Michael would face criminal charges, and the guardianship petition had been dismissed. But I felt no victory, only the crushing weight of truths I could no longer avoid. Martha sat across from me in the small, private room as I opened the box. Inside were the documents. She expected bank statements, recordings, evidence of Michael's conspiracy. But beneath those was something she didn't know about. Something I'd kept hidden even from my own attorney, an old USB drive. "Martha," I said, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold it. "Before we go further, you need to know something. About me. About what I did 13 years ago." I plugged the drive into her laptop. The video file opened, and for the first time in 13 years, I watched it again. Dashcam footage from Matthew's car. 10 seconds of grainy video that showed everything. Michael grabbing the steering wheel. Matthew screaming, "Michael, no!" The car swerving, then the screen going black on impact. Martha stared at the screen, then at me. "Eleanor, you've had this for 13 years. The police gave it to me a week after Matthew died. They asked if I wanted to investigate Michael further, if I wanted them to pursue charges. And I said no." The words came out flat, emotionless, because I'd practiced saying them to myself 1,000 times. I buried this video because I didn't want to lose both sons. I'd already lost Matthew. I couldn't bear to lose Michael too. From the bottom of the safety deposit box, I pulled out John's diary. I'd found it months ago while packing my things hidden in a box of his belongings I'd never fully sorted through after he died. I opened it to the entries I'd read so many times, they were burned into my memory. 20 years ago, I said, reading aloud. John wrote, "I told Eleanor that Matthew is bullying Michael. I caught Matthew hitting Michael in the garage. But Eleanor didn't believe it. She said Matthew would never do that. I feel helpless." I flipped to another entry. A week after Matthew died, John wrote, "Police showed me the dashcam video. I told Eleanor. She screamed that it was an accident, that I couldn't take Michael away from her. She begged me to bury the video, and I did, because I loved her more than the truth." Martha sat in silence as I read John's final entry from 5 years before his death. He tried to warn me about Michael's debts, about the fraud, and I told him Michael was just struggling, that I couldn't abandon my son. John realized I didn't want to see the truth. I wanted to live in illusion, and he let me. I closed the diary and looked at Martha, tears streaming down my face. John tried to tell me. The world tried to tell me, but I refused to listen. I told myself I was protecting Michael by hiding that video, but really I was protecting myself. Protecting the image of being a perfect mother with a perfect son. If I admitted Matthew bullied Michael, I'd have to admit I was blind. If I admitted Michael killed Matthew, I'd have to admit I failed. So I chose silence. I chose the comfortable lie. And now both my sons are destroyed. One dead, one in prison. And I killed them both. Eleanor, Martha said quietly, you didn't kill them. I did. By loving wrong. By staying silent. By refusing to see. I met her eyes. Martha, at the next hearing, I'm going to confess. I'm going to tell the judge I hid evidence 13 years ago. I'll face whatever consequences come. Because Emma and Danny deserve to grow up knowing that truth, however painful, is always better than comfortable lies. Martha tried to convince me that confessing might harm my custody case for the children, but I'd made up my mind I was done with lies, done with silence, done with protecting myself at the cost of truth. But before we could leave the room, my phone rang. It was the prison. Michael had attempted suicide in his cell an hour after being booked. He was alive in the hospital, but he'd left a note and the warden was reading it to me over the phone. Mom, I'm sorry for everything, but you need to know Amber lied about Emma. She's not my daughter. She's Matthew's. Amber was pregnant when Matthew dumped her. She used me to raise his child and take revenge on our family. And Mom, there's something else about Danny that you need to know. Ask Amber about who Danny's real father is. It's not what you think. Nothing in our family is what you think. Eleanor has just learned Michael attempted suicide and left a cryptic note about Danny's parentage. She already knows Emma is Matthew's biological daughter, but now there's a question about Danny. Eleanor is preparing for the custody hearing for both children while Detective Mills continues investigating. Eleanor has decided to confess her own role in hiding evidence about Matthew's death, accepting that truth and accountability matter more than protecting herself. She's emotionally exhausted, but determined to break the cycle of favoritism and lies. She's about to learn the full scope of how Amber's treatment of the children mirrored her own mistakes. Detective Mills ordered DNA tests for both children as part of the criminal investigation. The results came back within 48 hours and confirmed what Linda and Michael had both said: Emma was Matthew's biological daughter. But Danny was Michael's biological son. Michael had raised his dead brother's child while unknowingly fathering another. Mills interviewed Amber in jail, and for the first time, Amber told the complete truth. She'd gotten pregnant with Matthew's baby 2 weeks before he discovered she'd stolen from him and ended their relationship. Matthew died in the accident before ever knowing about the pregnancy. Amber hid it, gave birth to Emma in 2015, then deliberately sought out Michael, who looked identical to his twin brother. She seduced him, married him, and lied that Emma was his daughter. Michael had raised Emma for 10 years, never suspecting she wasn't his. I needed Michael to believe Emma was his, Amber said coldly when Mills played me the recording. And I needed to secure Emma's inheritance to the Patterson family fortune. Everything was for Emma. Everything was always for her. But the most devastating revelation came next. Mills showed me messages Amber had sent to her children over the years, messages recovered from her phone. To Emma, "You're special. You're beautiful. You're going to have everything." To Danny, "Don't bother me right now, and why can't you be more like your sister?" Amber had discriminated between her own children. She'd loved Emma Matthews' daughter and rejected Danny Michael's son. When Mills confronted Amber about it, her response made my blood run cold. Every time I looked at Danny, I saw Michael weak, pathetic, a failure. But Emma was Matthew's daughter, the man I loved, even though he rejected me. Emma was the reason I did everything, to give her the life she deserved. "You discriminated against your own son?" I asked, listening to the recording. Amber's voice came through the speaker with chilling clarity. "Just like you did with Michael and Matthew. Don't act superior, Eleanor. We're the same. We both destroyed one child by loving the other too much." The words hit me like a physical blow because she was right. I'd done to Michael exactly what Amber had done to Danny. I'd created the blueprint for this tragedy. Mills and Martha met with me to discuss custody. The court needed to decide what would happen to Emma and Danny while their parents faced criminal charges. I want custody of both children, I said. Not just Emma, because she's Matthew's. Both of them. I will not repeat my mistake. I will love them equally. I'll show Danny that blood doesn't determine worth, and I'll show Emma that being special doesn't mean being more loved. Martha looked at me carefully. Eleanor, are you sure Danny is Michael's son, the son of the man who tried to kill you? Danny is a 7-year-old child who has done nothing wrong except be born to the wrong parents. Just like Michael was a child who did nothing wrong except be born not Matthew. This ends with me. The cycle of unloved children ends now. The court granted me temporary custody of both children. I brought Emma and Danny home to my house, which the court had returned to me, and as I watched them explore the rooms, I thought about second chances, about breaking cycles of pain, about how love should never be a competition. But then I received a call from Detective Mills with urgent news. Mrs. Patterson Amber made bail 2 hours ago using an offshore account we didn't know existed. She's disappeared. We have an APB out, but Eleanor, given what she said about you being the same as her, and given her mental state, I believe she's not done with you. She's planning something. And I think she's coming for the children. We need to get you all to a secure location now. Eleanor has custody of both children and has just learned Amber is free and potentially dangerous. Mills wants her to hide, but Eleanor has spent weeks being reactive, being a victim running. She's done running. She's also done with half-truths and passive strategies. She has evidence against Amber. She has police support, and she has something Amber wants Matthew's records proving Amber stole from him. Eleanor is going to use herself as bait one final time, but this time completely on her terms. She's sending the children to safety with Linda, who, despite everything, Eleanor trusts with their lives, if not her friendship. Eleanor is calm, resolved, and ready to end this, once and for all. I refused to go to a safe house. Instead, I did something that made Detective Mills argue with me. For 20 minutes, I posted my address publicly on social media. The post was simple and direct. I am Eleanor Patterson. My daughter-in-law, Amber Patterson, tried to kill me to steal my house. If Amber is reading this, I know where you came from. I know who you are, and I have everything Matthew left about you, including evidence you stole from him. If you want it, come get it. Tonight. I'll be waiting. This is insanely reckless, Mills said. No, this is the end. Amber will come because she can't let that evidence exist, and when she comes, we'll be ready. We spent the afternoon preparing, hidden cameras in every room, undercover officers stationed in the house next door and in a van down the street. I wore a wire and carried a panic button in my pocket, and I sent Emma and Danny to stay with Linda, who, despite everything I knew, would protect them with her life. Amber arrived just after sunset. She didn't break in or try to attack. She knocked calm and deliberate. I opened the door with police listening to every word from their positions nearby. She looked exhausted, disheveled, but her eyes were still cold and calculating. You don't have any evidence about me and Matthew. You're bluffing. Want to try? I gestured to a box on the coffee table. Inside was Matthew's old diary with entries about someone he called A, and a note. She stole 8,000 from me. I was a fool to trust her. Amber's hands shook, but she tried to maintain composure. So what? Matthew's dead. No one cares about ancient history. But this is different. I pulled out a printed email, the one Mills had recovered from the document forger's computers. An email from Amber's account proposing $50,000 to handle the Eleanor problem permanently. The message predated Michael's involvement. This was Amber's plan, not Michael's. Her face went pale. "You can't prove that's from me. The forgers already testified against you to reduce their sentences. Amber, you lost." Something broke in her then. She collapsed to her knees, and for the first time I saw genuine emotion instead of performance. "Matthew destroyed me. He humiliated me, told everyone I was a thief. I just wanted to take back what he took from me." I sat down across from her, no longer angry, just tired. "Amber, you destroyed yourself. Matthew didn't do that. And now you've destroyed Michael. Destroyed Emma's childhood. Destroyed Danny's sense of worth. For what? For this house? I just wanted a better life," she sobbed. "I grew up poor. I wanted my daughter to have what I never had. But you taught your daughter that other people are just tools. Now Emma will grow up without either parent. Is that the better life you wanted?" The police moved in then, handcuffing Amber. She didn't resist. As they read her rights, she looked at me one last time. "You think you're better than me? You also destroyed your son." "We're the same." "No," I said quietly. "We're different in one way. I admit my guilt. And I'll do better with the grandchildren, but you'll never change." As they led her to the door, I said one more thing. "Amber, you spent 5 years planning revenge on Matthew. You destroyed my son. My family tried to take my life. And in the end, you get 25 years in prison. No money, no house, no children. Matthew rejected you 8 years ago, and now the universe rejects you too. That is justice." 6 months passed. I sold the old house, too many ghosts, too many memories of who we'd all pretended to be. I bought a smaller home in a quiet neighborhood where Emma and Danny could have fresh starts. The court granted me permanent custody of both children. Emma, now 11, sees a therapist twice a week and is slowly learning that she's loved, not because she's special, but because she's herself. Danny at 8 is beginning to trust that when I say I love him, I mean it without conditions or comparisons. Michael received 18 years for voluntary manslaughter and attempted murder. Amber got 25 years for conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. I visited Michael once in prison, not to forgive completely, but to tell him the truth. "I can't forgive you for what you did, but I can forgive myself for failing you. And I'll do better with Emma and Danny. They'll know they're loved unconditionally without comparison. That's the gift I couldn't give you, but I'll give them." He cried and gave me Matthew's watch, the one he'd kept for 13 years. "Mom, Matthew deserves to rest. Please bury this with him and tell him I'm sorry." I buried the watch at Matthew's grave with a letter apologizing for loving him so much that I forgot to love Michael, promising to do better with the next generation. That evening, as Emma and Danny decorated our Christmas tree, Emma asked if I was happy. I looked at these 2 children who'd survived so much yet could still smile, and I realized something profound. Happiness isn't about the perfect house or the perfect family. It's about surviving the worst and still having the strength to love. Michael tried to take everything from me. But in the end, he gave me something priceless, the courage to build a new life from the ashes of the old. And that was worth more than $85 million. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another incredible true story. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone you trusted? How did you find the strength to move forward? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else who's going through something similar. And if you believe in second chances and breaking cycles of pain, leave a heart emoji to show your support. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, the truth may hurt, but lies destroy. Choose truth always.